So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to the, there's a website which lists all the functionality of the API. It's actually in the resources tab. So Weibo has a social network. There's also a site called open.weibo, which is the developer network, which has all the resources for third-party developers. A subset of that website, you can see here, Weibo API reference, will list all the functionalities of the API. Now, there's a bit of a weird thing. Like at some point, a couple years ago, Weibo released API 2.0, which is the current version. For some reason, there's an English version of open.weibo, which has an API reference, but it's totally different. I think it's API 1.0. They never updated it. So what I recommend is you access this page. If you need to read what these things say, use Google Translate. I have this set up as a plugin on Chrome. It's super useful. But here you can see all the actual commands. So each one of these is a command or a request you can make to Weibo, and it'll give you information back. And a lot of times you can tell what these things are just by looking at the name, okay? So these are all the things you can ask for, and they're categorized in terms of the type of thing. There's status, which are like the tweets. There's comments. There's everything about users. Anything with a red symbol here, you need advanced access, which we will never have. This is for actual approved developers, which we aren't. But you can look at pretty much anything that doesn't have a red thing you can get. The thing that we're going to be interested in a lot in this class is the place parameters. And this is sort of like Weibo's Foursquare. It allows Weibo users to check into certain destinations. So the big data set I have available is all of the check-in locations in all of the PRD. And they're organized by numbers, which are POI numbers, points of interest. And you can look at all of these commands for things you might be interested in getting. And we can go over more like what does what later, but I would just explore this on your own. So just to start off with, I'll pick one here. Maybe we'll do, let's see, there's a one called POI photos, which is pretty interesting. This is place POI's photos. This is actually, you can request photos that people have taken in a specific place of interest, okay? So if you click on any of these, it's going to give you a reference to that query, okay? And what you need to pay attention to is this. This is a URL. So remember I said that all these requests go through the address bar. This is actually the first part of the request. And what you need is this request that tells Weibo what you want, and you need these parameters. This will give Weibo enough information to give you the data you want. And all we have to do is actually just string those things together to get the data that we want. Okay, so I have a code here. I'm just gonna paste this into a notepad. This is my authorization code. You'll get your own, right, through following those instructions. And then I found a place of interest. You can't search. I can't search like Shenzhen Airport or whatever. You have to actually have some way of locating the actual ID of a place. If you want to find a place, you can search Weibo and find this ID, or you can look at the data set. We haven't gone over QGIS yet, so you might not know how to like pull up the data set into GIS. But the data set I provide online actually has every location, geolocated. You can actually go in, and each location will have the name and also its POID. So we can talk more about that later, but just for the purposes of the demo, I'm just gonna say that I found an interesting place. This is actually a big mall in Hong Kong, which a lot of people check into. So we're just gonna use that for our example. All right, so I have this information, and now I can generate this request to to the Weibo API. And literally what I do is I'll just start combining this information to one long string, and when I paste that into the address bar, it's gonna send that request to the server. So there's my request. So this will be the first part. Then I make a question mark, and I'm gonna fill in the fields that's looking for. Just as a reference, if I paste this right now into the address bar, yep, so it's sent the information and it's giving me something back, but it's basically complaining that I haven't provided enough information. I haven't given it my app key, so it's not gonna give me anything back. Okay, So to give it those parameters, I just start putting them into the same string of commands. I'll do a question mark and I'll do one by one. Now the source you don't really need. The source is your app key, which I go over in the video. You don't really need to use it. All you really need is this access token. You can skip the source if you want. So I'll start with access token, and I just type these in exactly how they're written here. So access token, and then I do equals, and I'll put in my code. So authorization code, access token, same thing. So that'll tell Weibo who I am and that I'm like eligible to get this information. And then each parameter that I send to Weibo is separated by an ampersand. That's this squiggly and sign. And then I'm going to fill in this other information about what I want to get from them. So the first is POIID. That's my point of interest. POID, and these texts have to match what's here. I'm going to paste in my code here, and then I'm going to do and now the next thing I want is the count. Count is how many results you get at one time, and you can have any number up to 50, but since we always tend to want the most data, pretty much you're always going to have this at 50. If you do anything over 50, it's just going to give you 50. And then page is the page number, so if you have more than 50 results, you can scan it by page. So if you have 100 results and you say 50 count, it's going to have 2 pages, but you have to tell it which page of that data you want. So we're just going to say the first page, and then sort and base app are optional. You don't need to specify those. Okay, so that's our whole code, our original request, and all the parameters it needs to give us that information. And this can be applied to any of these calls. You just have to watch out for what it wants. It's going to have the same formula. Basically, it's going to have an address, URL, and then it's going to have this table. And see, it's asking for different things. It depends on what data you want. So now I have my request. I'm just going to copy this and paste it into the address bar. Send it. Okay, so you get this huge mess, and this huge mess is the data, and it's structured in a data structure called JSON. So you might want to jot that down. JSON is one way of structuring data, text data, that makes it parsable. So you can actually search the structure. It has a structure to it, but instead of a structure like an Excel document, which has rows and columns, it's dynamic. And it uses some combination of curly brackets and square brackets to structure the data in a way that you can later find it. And we're going to use this structure to find pieces of information in this data. Okay? You can look online for the JSON specifications. It's JSON, and you can see it, JSON here. It's very easy to use once you kind of understand what it's trying to do. Now, Chrome should decode this and give you that well-structured representation. For some reason in my Chrome, something happened along the way where it no longer does that for me. Hopefully yours still does. If you have a problem with it and it looks like a crazy mess, there's online JSON decoder websites that will take that and decode it. It's Parser is the right name. So I use this website, JSON Parser online. Basically, you can paste some data in here, and it's going to restructure it in a way that's more readable, understandable on the right side. Okay, so this is the same exact data. It's just taken it and restructured it using those curly braces and the square brackets. Okay, you see now what this data is. Again, remember what we asked it? We asked for 50 posts that people made of pictures taken at a specific location, which is this mall in Hong Kong. It's given us those 50 posts, but instead of giving us in the website format, it's just giving us the pure data, which is what we actually want. The statuses here is like an array, which we can get, and it contains all 50 of these posts. Each one has a structure to it. You can see here, it's 1 through 50. It has all this information that's in quotes and the colon. So you guys remember this quotes and colon syntax from last week when we talked about dictionaries? It's the same exact thing, okay? The dictionary format in Python is super similar to JSON. That's why people use both, and they live happily ever after. It's really easy to kind of think about how to do this, because when you bring in the JSON, it's basically like a big dictionary, okay? So what you do to get this data is basically search for these keys and the thing after the key is the content, and that's what we want. This is the way we're going to search it. Okay, so that's the structure. That's all I wanted you to see here. If we go down, each post has this information about the post itself. Because we're looking at photos, right, it's going to give us the link to the actual photo here. So this is pretty interesting. We can just take this as an actual web link where the photo is located. We can original pic. We can paste this into here and see someone's private life. So that's pretty interesting. And then there's a category called user for each one, which has a subset of information about the user itself, including the ID. So everything in Weibo, it has a unique identifier. People have these IDs, or UIDs, or something it's called. Places have these POI IDs, okay? And this is the way that we're going to be able to delve deeper into the data by following these IDs. But that's the basic structure that this data comes in. But remember, the basic idea is pretty simple. We just send a command to Weibo. As long as we provide all the information, it'll give us this structured data set back, and that we can parse and analyze through Python.